An African safari had long been on our bucket list. After 3 awesome biannual catamaran trips with our travel buddies, we decided to do this land-based thing before we got too old to rattle around in safari vehicles or outrun wild animals. After much planning and debate, we decided on Tanzania. The core of it would be safari to the Serengeti, in addition to the Ngorongoro Crater and the Tarangire National Park. My wife Annette insisted on inserting a balloon ride into the itinerary, and the rest of us reluctantly agreed. As long as we were in the neighborhood, we decided to add a short hike up Kilimanjaro on the front end and a beach rest on the island of Zanzibar on the back end. We knew we would be in for some super animal encounters, but we had no idea how much Tanzanian culture we would absorb and how much the Tanzanian people would come to endear themselves to us. I'll get to more of that in a bit, but first let me share a little bit about our preparation. Our travel buddies had rotated the job of lead planner over our 4 biannual trips. This time, Serge raised his hand. He had recently retired from corporate and needed something to focus on, and he had the added benefit he had been to safari in Kenya with his family when he was 14 years old. He quickly became a fan of YouTuber Ella McKendrick, and something in her bubbly personality persuaded him that Tanzania was the place to go. She also suggested we were better off cost-wise finding a local company. After considerable research, he settled on Safari Souls and couldn't have made a better choice. We kidded him throughout that he had a 5-star rating for his prep work. My own prep included watching YouTube videos, including Ella in part to try to understand Serge's infatuation. I also read and watched Out of Africa and a couple of Hemingway short stories and was unfazed that, spoiler alert, leading characters died in all of the plots. We bought international health insurance, first time for us, applied for tourist visas, got vaccinated for typhus and hepatitis A, got instructed on malaria pills, and weighed our gear several times, debating the pros and cons of convenience versus hauling hassle, and making sure to stay under the limit of the prop plane flight to Zanzibar. My wife and I had to deflect the anxieties of other family and friends. Questions such as, aren't you worried about the Iran war? You may run out of jet fuel and get stuck there. How close will you be to the Ebola outbreak? You're going to sleep in a tent with wild animals around? Not less than 2 different people told us they had a friend that went on safari and had been grabbed by a trunk of a massive elephant and slammed to death. I had yet to run across one of those cases in a YouTube video or travel brochure, so I was thinking those might have been anomalies and perhaps the same person. I'm pretty optimistic by nature, but that elephant with the killer trunk kept popping into my head, and so I also prepped my will and funeral instructions for our adult kids. After a 24-hour of non-sleepable flights from Charlotte to Washington to Ethiopia, we landed at Kilimanjaro Airport and walked down the stairs of the plane, across the tarmac, past the visa check, found our bags and walked past customs to find our driver, who was waiting with a whiteboard with our names on it. Our drive to the Arusha Farmhouse from the airport was a pretty fair introduction to Tanzania. Our driver swerved around slower trucks, tuk-tuks, potholes and motorcycles, past cattle and goats, women balancing goods on their heads, banana trees, cornfields, past empty plastic bottles and trash, roadside stands where women sold identical goods as their neighbors. Drivers flashed lights and blinked turn signals in a code I never did decipher. Within an hour, we were checked into our comfortable room and sat by the pool and sipped a beverage. We had the entire place to ourselves, it seemed, until eventually a Spanish tour group unloaded and processed themselves toward dinner at various speeds. We ate barbecue that night and slept soundly, tucked inside our mosquito net. Our friends arrived, after we were sound asleep. So we met them for breakfast the next morning and cooled our heels until our tour company arranged for a tour of Arusha. Arusha is a city of about 700,000 people, but doesn't really feel like it's that big. Maybe because it's spread out rather than tall. Agricultural and tourism are the top two economic drivers of Tanzania, and both were evident in Arusha. We were treated to an overview of the Tanzanite precious stone business at a museum. Then our guide escorted us through the city market. It wasn't too busy at that time of day. The vendors vastly outnumbered us pretend customers and mostly ignored us as we walked through the photographing all of the goods that seemed unique, which incidentally was just about everything. The only real pressured sales pitch was the spice ban, but the group had sort of asked for that. We fortunately missed the main part of the fish cleaning and the processing of live chickens. I think the scene lingered in the back of our mind every meal where fish and chicken were popular courses on most buffet tables. We had a very brief session of looking and shopping at the art gallery, where they had a wide range of souvenirs from $4 bracelets to $500 Tanzanite to multi-$1,000 pieces of art, including some Tree of Life pieces that took as much as 20 years to carve. We opted for the bracelets. The following morning, we met at 6 a.m. for a roughly 3-hour ride to the Maringu Gate of Kilimanjaro. Dennis was recovering from a recent bout of pneumonia, so the tour company arranged for a more leisurely outing at the next highest mountain, Meru. We had a boxed breakfast in the car on the way. A few of us rented hiking poles, and after a quick park ranger check to confirm we didn't have plastic disposable water bottles or knives, we were trudging up along the trail. Our lead guide was Calvin, the product of two local tribes, Chug and Maasai, and his understudy, Lucas. Lucas was a recent college graduate learning the guide business and could not yet afford proper hiking boots or poles, which were prerequisites for becoming an official guide. The trail wasn't too technically difficult, but it did have some challenging points at times. I had not bothered to learn how far we were actually going to hike, and was a little surprised to hear it would be a 10-mile round-trip hike that would take about 8 hours and climb about 2,700 feet to roughly a 9,000 foot of altitude. Our guides kept us on pace, although we stopped often to check various plants and families of colobus and blue monkeys. Calvin said we were lucky to see the colobus, which are typically shy and hard to spot, especially at that time of year. Lucas started to explain why the blue monkeys were called such, and Calvin laughed and said his understudy was too bashful to give the real explanation. We stopped near a waterfall, and Lucas scooped water into his thermos. Annette had a life straw and wanted to try it out, and then passed it around, and we all tried it. None of us, Lucas or the rest, had any negative consequences from our decisions. We arrived at the Mandara huts, which is one of the base camps for a summit hike. The altitude was nearly 9,000 feet, and we had climbed 2,700 feet in 5 miles in 4 hours. We rested and thought about taking the short hike to the Ngorongoro Crater, but the air was very foggy at this altitude, and we shrugged off the sense of FOMO, as we likely wouldn't get a view anyway. A group of college kids in the tour business celebrated their own climb. They found us a willing and reasonable target market, and led by an outgoing gal named Rosemary, chatted with us, took group photos, sang the Jumbo song, which was amazing and seemed spontaneous, though we found out later it was a popular song that would be repeated most of the places we would stay at during the next several days. We descended the mountain on a slightly straighter path, joined by a couple of the students. We tourists had our hiking boots and poles. Rosemary wore her school shoes, but her energy level was probably higher than most of us combined, and she practiced all our names all the way down the mountain and invited us to her July 3rd graduation. We stopped to watch the division of labor of an ant colony, with its soldiers and workers dividing up the work. We made an effort to avoid stepping on any nests, but virtually all of us had ants in our pants at some point. By 5 p.m., we were buying hiking patches, getting our boots washed by the girls waiting outside the bathrooms, and drinking warm beer that had baked in the back of the van while we were hiking. Soon we were resting in the van, trusting the amazing reflexes of our expert driver, heads bobbing on the turns and potholes and speed bumps, and racing around slower-moving trucks. We were back at the farmhouse at 9 p.m., just enough time to trade Instagram follows from John, our favorite bartender, and eat a meal. And then we tucked ourselves into our mosquito netting for the night. We were all checked out and assembled at 8:30 for our first foray into the animal world, Tarangire National Park, which is very exciting as we were driving through it, but in retrospect, we took it as a warm-up for the real action of the Serengeti, just in a slightly more condensed wrapper. We had 2 vehicles for 6 of us and decided we would take turns mixing up during the week. One driver was named Jackson, like Michael, he said. It happened to be our grandson Jackson's 2nd birthday that day, so we took it as a sign we should ride with him. We stared out the window on the way there, trying to take in as much culture as possible. A bus full of uniform-clad school kids smiled, pointed, and waved at us. "They call you Suzu," said our guide Jackson, "the white one, or the foreigner." We were a sort of mobile novelty show and would get used to waving the rest of the week. Jackson was super informative with any question we asked over the next several days, and he took the opportunity to learn about us and our American culture. The Maasai tribe was evident everywhere. We talked with Jackson about multiple wives, dowries, living conditions, for example, no water or electricity, and government policies of dealing with them. We saw young barefoot kids with their cattle sticks walking along with their herds, women shopping or carrying goods on their heads, or washing clothes in ponds or small lakes, school kids waiting for a bus, Maasai men typically dressed in bright red shuka outer garment, armed with cattle prods and occasionally a spear, sometimes barefoot or otherwise clad in sandals made of recycled motorcycle tires. The men, according to custom, were typically not working but standing or sitting around with other men talking about the sorts of things Maasai men talk about. I never found out for sure, but probably kids, cattle, wives, and dowries. Between Jackson and his co-guide, Elias, we got the impression the Maasai men took their societal cues from the prides of lions. Men eat first, women do most of the work, and kids do the rest. So men needed 3 wives to perform all the tasks and have sufficient children to manage the workload. They only lived around 50 years, though, but we never did discuss how that compared with the lions. Driving into Tarangire, we had our first example of the so-called African massage. The washboard dirt road got us bouncing as soon as we turned off the 2-lane highway. We were greeted at the entrance of the park by 2 huge baobab trees, and shortly after by a family of warthogs, 2 of the younger which were facing off with head-to-head combat and practicing that natural process of selecting who was going to be the future leader. We initially saw several varieties of birds, plants, and trees, and it seemed the entire park was covered with morning glories. We saw our first elephant and stared in awe until Jackson coaxed us into moving by promising we had many more sights to see. In all, we saw a herd of elephants, giraffe, mongoose, water bucks, a leopard in a tree we could not get a perfect photo of. We also had a couple of monkeys cross our path as they were scampering away and having earlier been informed it was easy to tell which species. The baobab trees were fascinating. We saw a wide variety, and our guide pointed to where elephants would gnaw into the trees for food and water during drought conditions. After a nice sit-down lunch at the picnic area inside the park, we drove out of the park past Lake Manyara toward the Serengeti. We bounced up a one-lane dirt road near the Ngorongoro Crater to the Foresite Eco Lodge, which was an incredible group of bungalows overlooking a valley in the lush rainforest. The staff greeted us with a Jambo song, and we tried our best to sing along. The central building and walkways were constructed of all local materials, which gave it almost a tree fort feel to it. Electricity was powered by solar, and showers were heated with solar tanks. There was Wi-Fi, but only in the central area, which probably had the added benefit of forcing patrons to interact. We continued our tradition of being tired at the end of the night and forced ourselves to sit at the fire pit for a few minutes after dinner. We were up early for our super breakfast and coffee, and in our vehicles at 8 a.m. mixing up riders and drivers for variety. The men rode with Elias, and we talked about the politics of both countries as we drove toward the Serengeti. Dennis worked on his Swahili. We had to pass through the Ngorongoro gate on our path to the Serengeti, and a family of baboons greeted us at the gate, performing a variety of rather disgusting grooming rituals, having apparently not evolved yet to acquire whatever the gene that might foster modesty. We stopped at a small rest area that shared information on the Olduvai Gorge, renowned for being the cradle of mankind. We didn't have time in the agenda for us to go deeper, but it was quite amazing to know we were so close to the site that scientists could track the evolution of mankind back 2 million years. Later, a black mambo snake crossed the road in front of us, and Elias slammed the brakes, and I just barely got a photo. Nearby, a sandal-footed Maasai walked through the scruff with his cattle prod, not the least bit worried. We motored on and soon found ourselves riding the one-lane dirt rut-etched road to the Serengeti, which means endless plain in Swahili. We saw herds of zebras and wildebeests, and I started a check sheet to track which animals we saw each day. We watched 3 cheetahs just chilling in the brownish-green grass being stalked by the paparazzi of photographers in safari vehicles snapping digital pics like they all intended to be featured on the cover of the next National Geographic magazine. We were right there with them, hoping the cheetahs would at least yawn, if not get up and chase dinner. They were minding their own business, and we had to mind ours. After taking more photos of resting cheetahs than we would ever be able to use, Elias suggested we go look for other interesting animals. As we rumbled down the rutted road, my biological clock suddenly informed me it was time to attend to my daily untimed zone adjusted bathroom ritual. I spent a few minutes silently rejecting the notion and looking out at the endless plain for a non-existent rest area or gas station or tree even. Finally, quite sheepishly, I informed Elias that I would need to step out of the vehicle ASAP and asked the odds of getting eaten by a cheetah if I did so. He pulled into an intersection of 2 one-lane tracks and handed me a roll of toilet paper as I stepped out of the vehicle, plotting my strategy in the treeless plain. I don't remember ever having an audience for that sort of thing, and unfortunately it took me 2.5 attempts before I was successful. I finished just moments before the safari vehicle with the ladies pulled up alongside, asking what we were doing. The drivers conversed in Swahili and laughed, and Dennis said he heard something like, "make choco," and I prayed that nobody bothered to look down at the desecrated plain. We were soon off, with my dignity only partially destroyed, but I felt much better. We saw many other classic sightings. A baboon standing Rafiki-like atop a huge rock cluster. A threesome of elephants hugging it out in some erotic ritual we chose not to stick around for. A male ostrich chasing down 3 females with similar ideas. Giraffes hanging out, chomping on various bushes. The sun began setting as we stopped at the hippo pond listening for a laugh. The smell was atrocious, but we did hear a short laugh, so it was worth it. Look at him. We saw a lion in a tree, 3 young hyenas hanging out on the cool dirt of the one track, a pair of hyenas skulking away from us as if they had just been caught eating one of our pets. We arrived at the Serengeti Safari Haven as the sun was going down, and the staff greeted us with the Jambo song. "We thought you were lost," one of them said. Indeed, lost in deep thought on this amazing plain. The full moon hadn't risen yet, and in the darkened sky we stared at the constellation known as the Southern Cross, as the Maasai warrior with his spear and his flashlight and walkie-talkie waited patiently to escort us. I thought about washing clothes or writing in my journal. I'd had this vision from Meryl Streep in Out of Africa of writing in my journal while sipping wine in the open-air tent, listening to some classical music on a wind-up Victrola. Well, I was able to get Spotify to work with their Wi-Fi, but I had no wine at the tent. Our tent flaps were zipped shut tight for the night, and I didn't have enough energy to hold my pen upright for my journal. No, there would be no Meryl Streep moment that night. On the 6th day, we awoke to the alarm at 3:45, and I quickly pounded 2 lukewarm coffees thanks to packs of Via and a thermos the lodge had placed for me the night before. We called on the walkie-talkie and were led by a flashlight to the balloon ride pickup van. I thought maybe I would get some sleep on the 1-hour ride to the launch, but the ruts had other plans for me, as well as the talkative lady sitting next to me. We had too much happening in the headlights in front of us. We saw a large male lion on the prowl, a hippo and its baby munching on grass, and a hyena. In a short time, we were meeting our balloon pilot, a Spaniard named Abraham, choking down another cup of coffee and being instructed on the fine art of riding and landing safely in a balloon. The balloon launched as the sun was peeking over the horizon, and it was immediately amazing. We had a 360-degree view of this vast plain. Full moon setting in one direction, sun rising in the other, herds of zebra and wildebeest, a family of giraffes waking up for the day. The old African proverb entered my mind about the lion and the gazelle, both waking up to start running, one to feed his family, the other to avoid being the food. Well, in the real world version, the lion had been up well before dawn, but the point was still valid. Here was this vast and varied animal kingdom spread out below us, all getting ready to go about their business, to play their role in this ecological framework. We were flying silently over all this calm setting of grass, herds of animals like voyeurs. Then Abraham would pull the lever and the gas would rush, causing the flame to roar, and animals would scatter from the alien sound. Abraham was a multi-talented multitasker. He would pull the levers to raise and lower the balloon, all while adjusting his GoPro cameras, taking group portraits, pointing out wildlife, and deciding where and at what speed he was going to land. He was also an entertainer, telling retrod jokes and eventually compiling a 6-minute video keepsake while we were eating a celebratory breakfast. Our drivers, Jackson and Elias, picked us up at about 10. They had initially said today would be an easy day for us, and I again made the mistake of channeling the vision of Robert Redford and Meryl Streep chilling in our khakis. We immersed ourselves back deep in the Serengeti and lost track of time. Other highlights that day were several. We watched a cheetah stalk a herd of impalas, make his move, and ultimately miss. We collectively and individually could not decide if we were rooting for the cheetah or the impala. We found a family of lions chilling and waiting for their lion king to finish his meal. We drove a bit further and found the king himself stuffing his face into a wildebeest he had dragged into the shade of a bush. The stomach of the wildebeest was exposed and bloated. The lion lay there, attempting to digest his over-consumed Thanksgiving meal, chest heaving up and down from the indulgence. You could literally feel his indigestion. I just wanted to say, dude, let it go. Let your wives and kids have a turn. We ate lunch ourselves in the bush under an acacia tree, keenly conscious of the recent lessons not to overindulge. A giraffe ate his own salad a stone's throw from us. A gazelle scampered by 20 yards away, pausing just long enough to see what we were doing. After lunch, we made our way to the hippo pool, which we could smell long before we could see. I'd never witnessed this particular sight on YouTube or anywhere else. It was simultaneously fascinating and repulsive. Dozens of hippos were submersed and sleeping in the slow current of this pool. Tails unconsciously slapped the water to send cooling drops over the pack. The whole scene reminded me of raising pigs many years ago. Someone joked we should test the life straw in that hippo water, but nobody rose to the challenge. On the route toward the Serengeti Safari Haven, we saw a herd of zebras, a herd of impala, and another hyena. We did make it back to the haven a little earlier than the night before and were able to walk without a guide to our tents. We sat out by the fire with a beverage and watched the sunset across the valley. We ate dinner with just slightly more energy than the lion and went to bed exhausted again. We checked out about 8 a.m. and drove out the opposite way we'd come into the haven, toward the west, which was where the great migration was currently peaking. Our guides radioed and flagged down passing safari drivers to get tips on what to see. We were going to spend the night at the top of the Ngorongoro Crater, so we would have a long drive in front of us, and decided we could only get to the edge of the migration. We saw vultures circling and landing on a kill, so spent some minutes watching 20 to 30 vultures of various species intimidate each other and jockey for position in pecking order. From our vantage point, we couldn't tell what they were pecking at, but it was still a reminder of how everything had its place. The wildebeest is taken by the lion. The hyenas work on the leftovers. Then the vultures clean up the bones and leave some residue for the flies and beetles. We watched a family of elephants moving through the grass, a baby huddling near its mother and surrounded by the older siblings. A male elephant apparently enjoying quiet time at a distance on the opposite side of the one-lane track. A lone, lanky-legged wildebeest scampered by, having somehow lost his mom and the herd completely. We could tell he didn't know where to go, and we couldn't help him. We just knew he was going to end up as someone predator's afternoon snack. The other vehicle spotted a lone young male lion alertly perched in a tree, calling out for his brothers. Jackson drove up practically underneath it, and Annette played the part of National Geographic photographer, while I stood patiently behind her, working to trust our guide and appreciate his instincts and deep knowledge of the impulses of this sort of beast. I'd say, judging by our position in the vehicle, Annette trusted a little bit more than I did. We soon found ourselves trekking the endless plain toward the rest stop where we had originally entered the Serengeti to have lunch. That night we stayed at a campsite called Angara at the edge of the crater.
There we go. That's pretty cool.
We took so-called bucket showers, where the warmed-up water was carried in buckets up a ladder to our tent to let gravity feed the shower. Dinner for once was plated for us. We needed escort still, but this time the concern was water buffalo, as well as their huge piles of dung they left as warning signs. Supposedly Maasai warriors were more afraid of the buffalo than lions, so we appreciated the escort. I did some laundry and put my clothes out to dry, but awoke the next morning to find that we were shrouded in fog, and the clothes were wetter now than when I'd washed them. We assembled at 6 a.m. to get an early start for the drive down into the crater. Pulled out onto the paved road, and an elephant was walking along like he was headed to work. The view in the crater was magical. A fog bank hovered at a level that accentuated the feeling of being closed into this giant sanctuary filled with animals. We had some unique views. A serval cat with its coat of spots and stripes. Flamingos, variously on one leg or two, or swimming in the soda water of Lake Magadi. More water buffalo. Unique birds like the gray-crowned crane with its golden crown of still feathers. Secretary birds. We drove to where a small pride of lions was sauntering across the grassy plain with an awesome backdrop of the wall of the crater with the fog shroud still descended. We watched in awe as they ignored us, filming their literal catwalk. It was truly an amazing sight. 2 males with different sized manes, walking at a steady pace across the field, going who knows where. 3 others stepping along the road at a slight distance. We could sit there and watch all day, but suddenly realized a bathroom break was in order, and our guide negotiated the various objectives of his passengers, stopping at brief intervals to check out wildlife, but not lingering so long as to cause a mutiny. We pulled into a rest area and picnic area and broke out our box breakfast for what came to be breakfast and a show. We had this amazing natural setting, zebras and wildebeest wandering past us on the left, birds flying around us, a hippo couple mating in front of us, completely unfazed that we were right there with our cameras ready to expose their affair. It was a little awkward. We didn't exactly pick sides like we did in the cheetah versus impala duel 2 days prior, but there were some uncomfortable co-ed moments as the female's head would fall below the surface by the weight and antics of the male. You can only watch that sort of thing in mixed company for so long, though, and we pivoted to discussing our approach to finding a rhinoceros, which was the only animal of the so-called Big Five we had not yet seen. As usual, our guide seemed to know exactly where to look. Right after packing up breakfast with a combination of driving skill, radio support, and good binoculars, we found 2 rhinos at a distance. We were far enough away, they didn't even know we were there, but tough to observe without good binoculars or the high-powered lenses of the cameras. The timing of this sighting was perfect, as we had to begin our ascent out of the crater and toward the Arusha airport for our short flight to Zanzibar. We stopped at a souvenir shop and ate lunch, made a small speech with Jackson alias about how special our trip was, tipped them for their service, and in short order, we were checking into our flights, with yellow-vested porters hovering around insinuating that our baggage had a high chance of making the trip to Zanzibar, depending on our tipping habits. Our flight was delayed about an hour, and we sat there sort of digesting the transition we were about to make from the dusty, rutted, raw, natural animal kingdom to what was essentially a beach resort. Zanzibar was a blast and a super place to wind down and relax after our solid 5 days on safari. The safari was indeed the main meal, but Zanzibar would be like a dessert to cap it off. We stayed one night in Stone Town and awoke before daylight to a voice on a loudspeaker. Police? Fire? No. It was the call to morning prayer. We took a walking tour of the town and loaded up on the local history. Highlights were the Freddie Mercury Museum. He was born in Zanzibar. And the Slave Market Museum. We walked past the market, but it was much busier and smellier than the one in Arusha, and we were exhausted, so we skipped most of it. We then taxied to a resort called Zanziblue on the northeast side of the island, about an hour from Stone Town. We felt like we had the entire coast to ourselves. Zanziblue was a beautiful boutique resort with palm-thatched roofs and balconies that looked out over the pool and the shoreline that changed hues dramatically with the tides. Our group of 6 made up about a third of the total patrons. We took a hike out into the shoreline at low tide with a couple of local boys, arranged by Zanziblue. For a little tip money, the barefoot kids gave us hands-on introduction to the urchins and starfish and other unique sea critters. And they entertained us by practicing their language skills and singing songs like Shakira's Waka Waka, This Time for Africa.
1, 2, 3. Jambo, jambo bana, habari gani? Nzuri sana, oye, wageni, mwakaribishwa, Zanzibar yetu, hakuna matata, wageni karibuni.
We took one of our days to make the Safari Blue tour, which combined riding in a dhow, the traditional sailing vessel, a snorkel adventure, seafood lunch, and chilling on a giant sandbar. The start was a little shaky as we piled out of a van at a small cement slab near a stack of eggs where fins were thrust at us without any introduction. We then bounced down a highly rutted road and were dropped off in front of a barefoot man repairing his wooden boat with a handsaw. Our guide found us and introduced himself as Jack Sparrow, and without any other background marched us out into the water and pushed us up a ladder onto one of the many wooden dhow boats that sat bobbing there in the surf. His energy level was almost overpowering, as he sought to entertain us in ways we hadn't the appetite to absorb. He didn't use any of that energy to give us safety tips, however, and we looked around the boat ourselves to find life jackets and judge seaworthiness. We had a moment of indecision as a rainstorm hit us just as we were thinking about snorkeling. But anyway, snorkeling during a rain should be a no-brainer since you're getting wet anyway. Collectively, we had snorkeled many places around the world and were super impressed with the coral formations, and particularly the multicolored, almost glow-in-the-dark starfish. I slipped on the exposed wet clay as we walked out to our boat at low tide, and I bruised a rib, so it smarted a little when our guide started giving us little post-snorkeling safety tips. He and his other 3 helpers showed us their fingers. Look, we call this Zanzifinger. We all got bit by a moray eel because we stuck our fingers where we shouldn't have. Good thing none of you did that. Also, the clam. You stick your finger in there when it's open and it would snap it off. Well, thank you for that advice, Jack Sparrow, I thought to myself. Anything else we should know after the fact while we contemplate your tip amount and I see if I can reach my wallet with this bruised rib? We were back at the resort in time to join an incredible dinner on the beach for what they called Swahili night. There was a trio of percussionists setting the stage for a trio of gals performing a very traditional, provocative dance. I had alternating moments of uneasiness, like when the lion looked down at me from the tree just feet away, or the hippos made it in front of us at breakfast. I wasn't sure where to put my eyes. Annette had a beautiful dress she packed for such an occasion, and she was cajoled into coming up to learn a few of the moves. They somehow knew Serge had skills in this department, and they brought him up to join the dance troupe as well. And we were all there for the grand finale. Our final day in Zanzibar was also our last in Tanzania, and we made a point of chilling out with no focus or ambitions. Well, except Annette had one more thing on her to-do list, a headstand on the beach. She also got a massage. We said our goodbyes at dinner. The other 4 headed to the airport for a midnight flight. Annette and my flight were 8 hours later, so figured we would sleep a little first. Our server that night left us a little note that perhaps summed up our mutual respect. Indeed, we were happy, fun-loving, reasonable guests. As Dennis described us earlier in the trip, we were somewhere in that gray zone between tourist and traveler. We had successfully fulfilled a key item on our bucket list, without suffering more than a slightly bruised rib, an ant bite, and a little oxygen deprivation. There were no elephant slams or Ebola virus or errant drone strikes from the Iran skirmish. I will forever remember the highlights: the brightly colored starfish, the stalking cheetah, the hugging elephants, the fog and mist-enclosed crater in the early morning, the balloon hovering over the herd of zebras, and the dual safari vehicles with the dust trail bouncing across the endless plain of the Serengeti. And though the animals were the main quest, it was the people that made the journey. On one side, there was our group of 6, with our complementary skills of planning, photography, historical insights, plant knowledge. What I will remember most is the Tanzanian people. Our guides, servers, campsite hosts, kids on the school bus, the smiles, the Jambo songs, the helpfulness, the genuine interest in sharing their culture and understanding ours. I'd highly recommend putting a Tanzanian safari on your own bucket list. We are so fortunate to have done it now while we had that enabling combination of time, health, money, travel buddies, supporting spouse, and enough confidence to overcome the slight but healthy dose of fear. I would love to say that we'll make it back there someday, but the world is a huge place, and there is only so much time, and so only time will tell.